to extend the orders and powers made under Bill 195, the Reopening Ontario Act of 2020. It would have been better titled the Lockdown Act. Those powers and orders made over the last year were set to expire on the first anniversary of the Reopening Ontario Act's passing. Actually, prior to Bill 195, those emergency orders or powers would have actually expired within 28 days with the Emergency Act, but thanks to Bill 195, the Reopening Ontario Act, this government said 28 days wasn't enough, neither was 2 months or 3 months or 6 months. No, this government needed a year to have their orders enforced without debate or a vote in this legislature. A year of decisions behind closed doors without the scrutiny of this legislature. And now, about 2 months before the expiration of the one-year anniversary, this government wants an additional 7 months of emergency powers under the Emergency Act to continue authoritarian rule over the people of Ontario without scrutiny by this legislature, without debate, without vote on the measures introduced. It is this very act that I voted against last summer and was promptly thrown out of the government caucus immediately. The member from Brantford can really hold his comments, and I'm glad to hear that he's so happy to have overruling government powers. Well, I'm sure his voters will remember that come next election. So I say the act that gives the Premier these powers was an overreach, and I maintain that. The Premier and the government seemed insulted that I, as a member of this legislature, would not just give up my voice or right to vote in representing my constituents to the Premier for a year. And here they are, back again, 10 months later, asking for this power for another 7 months. Because according to this government, members of this legislature should get no vote or say on the emergency powers this government has declared or might declare in future. These extraordinary powers are to be debated and voted on, scrutinized regularly, not the way this government wants it, which is just once a year. You know, during one of my questions a couple of weeks ago, the Solicitor General took a swipe at me, saying she's going to show me how to do my job. Well, Speaker, let me inform the Solicitor General and every single government member that by supporting Bill 195 and supporting this motion for another 7 months, it is them that are not doing their jobs. It is them who are abdicating their responsibility as a member of this legislature by saying with one vote that they aren't interested in debating or scrutinizing or voting on emergency powers, that these members are happy to hand off their responsibilities in representing their constituents to the Premier to do the job for all of them over the last 10 months and over the next 7 months. Apparently, they're all here just to get along, wave and smile at the cameras. So perhaps the Solicitor General and the government members should look in the mirror and think about what it is they promised their constituents when they wanted to get elected, and what is it that they thought their jobs were. Because if it wasn't the basics, if their job wasn't to vote, debate and scrutinize on laws that are put in force, and they've decided instead the Premier can make all those decisions, what's the point of any of them even being here in this legislature? Speaker, I'd like to take the opportunity to point out something curious about this motion springing up today. At the very moment this motion was being debated, the Premier, instead of debating and defending his request of this House to extend his one-man rule for another 7 months, instead of defending his record over the last 12 months, he conducted a press conference to let Ontarians know that one day in the future there will be a reopening. At the same time he's talking reopening, he has his government passing a motion to give him authoritarian emergency rule for another 7 months. What the government gives the people with one hand, it certainly takes with the other. This government has been a great example of that motto, and this afternoon is a great example. We had no advance warning of this motion or debate. Instead of holding the debate and vote sometime in the next 2 months, closer to the one-year expiry, the government sprung it up today, just before a long weekend, to coincide with the Premier's press conference. Apparently, the government members couldn't be bothered to come back in the summer to pass further debate and vote on the emergency powers that they are requesting. They needed to get it done now, before a long weekend, perhaps so they can enjoy their summers without being bothered by their obligations of this legislature, while Ontarians struggle. It is no wonder that Ontarians are losing trust in government. Look at how government is treating them. Speaker, I think it's important to note, as this government is rushing this motion through, it's important to note and review what's gone wrong for the last year by giving this government the power for this Premier to make closed-door decisions, micromanaging every minute and aspect of the lives of Ontarians without the scrutiny of this legislature. This government is asking us to give them this power without coming forward with a plan to reopen schools, because the Premier says he has been given different opinions from his advisors. Apparently, the Premier has requested these powers for another 7 months, but isn't actually the one who's in charge, which begs the question, why are we giving the Premier these powers when he isn't willing to take responsibility or make the tough decisions? So, no plans for schools reopening. Let's look at some of the items this government has refused to take responsibility for. There is no commitment from this government to ensure the OPP and Children's Aid are not threatening parents regarding how they parent their children on social distancing or masking. They won't take responsibility or address the draconian acts they've taken against churches that wish to pray in person, a total lack of respect for this. We have seen other jurisdictions and other countries, such as the United Kingdom, allow churches to gather, even during their most draconian efforts, but not this government. Total contempt for the legislature's role, total contempt for churches assembling in person. We have finally heard the government wants to reopen outdoor activities, but of course, only at unrealistically small numbers, arbitrary numbers of a gathering, without any scientific justification to back these numbers up. These are just some of the examples of areas that this government has failed to address or taken responsibility for as they come back today, right before a long weekend, asking for emergency powers, extraordinary, unprecedented powers for an additional 7 months. These orders and powers used by the government, along with the numbers they have arbitrarily come up with this afternoon, tied to stages of reopening, need to be scrutinized and debated in this legislature regularly, not every 10 months or 7 months. Speaker, I would like to conclude by saying that I was concerned about the precedent that we, as elected public servants representing the voters, have and continue to set on our future generations on how our democracy operates and what our government can and cannot do. But it is clear that with this motion, the precedent has been set. A truly unprecedented overreach of government, a power grab that we have never before seen in our 153-year history, and one that is not getting better but is certainly getting worse from this government, who again cannot seem to help themselves, and they are getting definitely tired. These decisions continue to harm the livelihood of Ontario residents and their health. The cure is worse than the disease. And so, as Ontarians lose their freedoms, their jobs, their businesses, their savings, this government has also ensured the loss of their democratic system and their elected members representing them. Thank you, Speaker.